Hello, and welcome to a new episode of NSPE's Committee Corner, where this week we are going to give you an update on the appropriations process and kind of where we're at right now and where Congress is at in the process, and also provide an overview of what goes into budget reconciliation. And as a reminder, I'm your host, Margaret Edwards, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Associate here at NSPE. So to begin, just like a quick refresher on what all goes into the appropriations process. Of course, the first step is typically the president submits his budget to Congress, which President Biden has already done, that outlines policy priorities, funding requests for certain executive agencies. And then the next is Congress typically works on and passes a budget resolution, which is the agreement between the House and the Senate on what the goals for the budget are going to be for that year. And then both appropriations committees in the House and the Senate begin work on the 12 different appropriations bills. And then, if needed, so if the Congress passes two different bills, so between the House and the Senate, if their bills differ, they might need to go to a conference committee, and that conference committee will hash out any details and get agreed upon language between both chambers. And then the final step is the president either signs the budget into law, signs the appropriations bills into law, or vetoes them. And, for more details, a little bit more of a background on the appropriations process, feel free to check out an earlier episode of Committee Corner where Stephanie and I got together to talk and speak to this very topic. And, you'll get a little bit more of a glimpse into how the appropriations process plays out. And so now this begs the question, where are we at in the appropriations process? Right now, the House and Senate are kind of working in tandem on both the budget reconciliation and on the appropriations bills. And, particularly the House is, churning out some of those appropriations bills. In particular, the House Appropriations Committee has passed 7 of the 12 appropriations bills that they're responsible for. The final markup in which they favorably reported, I believe 2 of the bills happened earlier this month on the 16th, and the House is soon expected to take up these 7 bills on the floor by the full House of Representatives. It is possible that these bills will be combined to form what's called a minibus. So instead of an omnibus, which will be all 12 of the appropriations bills, since we only have a partial list of them, they could very well be combined to a minibus. And then also as a reminder, earmarks are back. This Congress, and within the appropriations process, they're being called community projects, but they're earmarks by any other name. And I have very, little shame in plugging another episode of the Committee Corner in which we talked about earmarks and how those are playing out, as well as, why earmarks can be important for understanding what the policy priorities of individual members of Congress are. So now that we kind of have an idea of where we're at, let's take a look and talk a little bit about budget reconciliation. Really important to note that, I really want to keep the focus of talking about budget reconciliation to the tool itself and how that plays out procedurally. I don't necessarily want to be focusing on the politics of it, but we're bringing this up because it is so timely and has been proposed as a tool of passing by the majority in the Senate of getting part of President Biden's agenda across the finish line. So since that, is coming down the pike, we want to kind of pull back the curtain on what goes into budget reconciliation and how you're going to see this process play out within the Congress. So to begin, like, what is budget reconciliation? The Congressional Research Service says that budget reconciliation is an optional, expedited legislative process that consists of several different stages, beginning with the adoption of the budget resolution. And they also continue on to say that the purpose of the reconciliation process is to allow Congress to use an expedited procedure when considering legislation that would bring existing spending, revenue, and debt limit laws into compliance with the current fiscal priorities established in the annual budget resolution. So there's a few key takeaways from just these two statements. The first is that having a budget resolution is essential to beginning the budget reconciliation process. And as part of that budget resolution, reconciliation directives are essential to even starting down that road. Also, that this is an optional procedure. It's an optional tool. It's not something that Congress is required to use with every budget resolution. And then finally, that budget reconciliation is a procedural tool or a procedural move that essentially makes legislation easier to pass, particularly within the Senate. And just like a little bit of history behind budget reconciliation. It was first introduced as a tool in the Congressional Budget Act of 1976, and it was first used in 1980. And since then, it has been used 25 separate times. So between 1980 and now in 2021, the Senate and Congress and the House have used budget reconciliation as a tool 25 times. So what all goes into making budget reconciliation happen, I think is the next question that we want to answer. So the Congressional Research Service has put this timeline together, and I think it is a great way of spelling out the steps that go into budget reconciliation. So the first, and certainly most important in getting this process going, is that a budget resolution is adopted that includes those reconciliation directives to individual committees. So reconciliation directives are pretty much like jobs saying, hey, committee, committee X, here's a directive for you as part of this reconciliation bill and what you are responsible for, whether it's a component of the bill, the whole entire bill. And there are three, and what kind of budgetary changes they would be responsible for, and how those changes that they're responsible for proposing bring existing law into alignment with the budgetary goals set forth in the budget resolution. And so there's three different changes, and so they are, direct spending, related to direct spending, revenue, or the debt limit. And so the committee will receive those reconciliation directives. They will work on creating language for the legislation and report that favorably out of committee. If needed, the budget committee will step in, package all of individual committees' work together, and report that bill. So report the reconciliation bill to the full chamber. And so now the reconciliation bill is out of committee, and it goes to the floor of either the House or the Senate. And there are procedural differences at play in passing a reconciliation bill versus any other normal piece of legislation. In the House, there's not much of a difference. It moves, from committee to the Rules Committee, who then establishes the rule for how a piece of legislation will be taken up by the full House of Representatives. And that, determines how long debate will be, as well as, how many amendments, what amendments can be made from the floor of the House. So that, again, not much different than how any normal legislation plays out over on House of Representatives side of Capitol Hill. But if we shift over to the Senate, there are procedural differences. The biggest difference being that a reconciliation bill is not subject to the filibuster, and meaning that 60 votes are not required to end debate. And the reason behind all of that is built into the Budget Act and process and rules around reconciliation is that debate is limited to 20 hours in the Senate. So, they start debate, that, clock for 20 hours starts, as long as they're, in session, actively in session. And at the end of that 20 hours of debate, amendments still can be introduced from the floor, but they then enter a vote-a-rama. And within the vote-a-rama, if I were a senator, I could introduce an amendment to this reconciliation bill. I'd get a little bit of time to kind of pitch it, talk about why I'm introducing it. And then immediately following, there is a vote on my amendment, which either will pass or fail. And then they end with final passage. And to pass a reconciliation bill, you only need your simple majority, so 50 plus 1 in the Senate. And so that's how the process plays out on the floor in either chamber. And, say that both the House and the Senate have passed their reconciliation bills. And if there's some differences in the reconciliation bills, those differences will be hashed out either in a conference committee or by an amendment exchange. And then once we have the same version of the reconciliation bill voted on and passed by both houses, it then goes to the president's desk for their signature or veto. In all 25 times that budget reconciliation has been used as a tool, the bill has been vetoed a total of 4 times. So only 21 of the 25 times has the president signed a reconciliation bill into law. And that's all since 1980. So, great. That's how reconciliation happens. But you will hear about different roles of reconciliation. I think the biggest one that you will hear about is the Byrd rule. And the Byrd rule exists in the Senate. The Byrd rule is named after former Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia. And the Byrd rule was first adopted in 1985 and later amended in 1990. And the Byrd rule, the big picture of the Byrd rule, is that it prohibits the inclusion of extraneous measures as part of the reconciliation bill. And those extraneous measures can include measures with no budgetary effect, measures that worsen the deficit when a committee has not achieved its reconciliation target, measures outside the jurisdiction of the committee that submitted the title or provision, measures that produce a budgetary effect that is merely incidental to the non-budgetary policy change, measures that increase deficits for any fiscal year outside the reconciliation window, and measures that recommended changes in Social Security. And so those are extraneous measures under the Byrd rule that are not allowed in a reconciliation bill. As an example, the most recent instance of the Senate using budget reconciliation was earlier this calendar year as part of the American Rescue Plan. And an instance where the Byrd rule happened and dinged a provision included in the reconciliation bill was the raise to the minimum wage. The parliamentarian, she stepped in, the Senate parliamentarian stepped in and said, this does not comply with the Byrd rule. So sorry, that can't be included in your reconciliation bill. And then there are other rules. Of course, the Byrd rule is the big one, but another rule that does exist within the reconciliation process is that all amendments must be germane. And by germane, that means amendments cannot be used to introduce new subjects or expand the scope of the bill. So if I'm either a member of the House or a member of the Senate, this germaneness rule does apply in both chambers. Say I introduce an amendment to require all vehicles in the United States in the year 2030 to be self-driving. Let's just use that as an example. A fellow senator or fellow congressman or woman can file a point of order against that amendment, and as long as they say it's not germane or not relevant to the scope of the bill, my amendment's not even going to be voted on, and it's going to be dinged, and I'm out of there. And so that rule about germaneness is in place in both the House and the Senate. There's others, but those are some of the big ones that do take place within the reconciliation process. And so I hope that kind of sheds a light on what all goes into reconciliation, and how the process plays out, and how we watching the process, whether it be appropriations or the budget reconciliation process, can have a better understanding of what's going on, and how we can better follow procedurally the events playing out in Congress. So with that, that concludes this week's episode of Committee Corner. Please be sure to tune in next time. And you can find the Committee Corner in the NSP Advocacy Center or on the NSP YouTube page. Thank you.